Perhaps we need some outside universal threat. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
And this is UFOs and other space anomalies. I'll let you guys go first, introducing yourselves and tell them why you're here.
Well, my name is Bill M. Tracer.
I'm sorry. I tried to make it through traffic out there, and it's a mess in the hall, just like driving on 240. 4240 even worse. I'm sorry, I'm late. How far did we get?
Bill was the first person introduced.
Okay. Hi, I'm late. I'm Kevin. Good to see you. Hey, I see you and Beth. And I'm here to talk UFOs and get freaked out because aliens terrify.
And like I said, I'm Bill M. Tracer, and I'm an artist and also a writer. And all of my art does deal with the topic in general. Like this week, I just finished up this new piece, which is a USO, an unidentified submerged object. And
I don't see the Andrews sisters.
so, and this was my first attempt actually at doing an underwater scene.
Could you hold it up higher? I couldn't see for the heads.
So for being my first attempt at an underwater scene, I felt like I did pretty good. So anyway,
Oh, that's your first underwater?
first underwater.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
I've done
cool,
a lot
man.
of 3D stuff. You know, like here's one of my other.
Doesn't the paint run?
No, it's done on the computer. You know, and the computer doesn't, you know, get
It's CGI.
Yeah, this is computer graphics, 3D graphics. Here, you know, this is my answer to the "I want to believe" poster. Belief's not enough. I want to know. So that was a poster I made that answers that one. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that particular poster. And I got some stuff with some grays, you know, just different things. There's reptilian there and other saucers in the sky. So, and in addition to, yeah, of course, I've researched ufology for a great number of years. So, you know, I guess you could call me an amateur ufologist because I haven't got anything published on the subject except online articles. But I have written some other things. Still kind of strange stuff, but not quite UFO related. Will the internet achieve sentience? My first book. And yeah, you can think so.
Everything it knows about us, oh yeah.
Well, there is
It knows
one.
all our secrets.
There is one thing that actually does relate to our topic at hand in this book, and that is when I talk about the possibility that, because I explore many different scenarios about what might happen, what kind of relationship we might have with this being if it does happen. And that was the idea that perhaps the internet might decide that full disclosure would be in our best interest as a whole, and just expose the data. Because after all, you know, if the internet does achieve sentience, it's going to have access to all data, pretty much, anything that's connected to the internet. And so it could probably learn a lot of that stuff that we don't know. And we want to know. That covers it.
My name is Norris Scott. A student at the University of Memphis. My major is religion and society with a minor in philosophy. I consider myself also an amateur ufologist. Tried to get in contact with MUFON and volunteer for them. They said that they already have some people working in the South Haven area. So pretty much I've been going around and a lot of people have come to me and I interview them about their UFO experience. I've had several UFO experiences like we talked about at the alien portion. I've had many of what's called sleep paralysis experiences, which based on my experience and the other people's explanation of their experiences, I don't exactly follow that. As well, I've had several UFO experiences that I've seen for myself. I've read several books by, of course, Zachariah Sitchin, what is the other guy? Eric von Daniken. Several of them. I've seen Ancient Aliens all the time with what's the Greek guy's name? With the wild hair.
Syphilis.
Yeah, I cannot.
I just call them aliens.
Syphilis.
My favorite one of that shows the dude with the hair that's like this.
Yeah,
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I think his name was like Giorgio.
Yeah, Giorgio.
Yeah.
Giorgio Tsoukalos, yeah.
And we were talking about logical fallacies before, and the appeal to ignorance fallacy. He is the perfect personification. Well, what else could it be? So it must be aliens. I was like, wait a minute, that's not logical. You know?
Yeah, no, I like the show, but like you, I agree. I call it kitchen sinking. He throws in everything in the kitchen sink, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And of course, when I talk to religious people, a lot of them believe there's a growing following of religious people that believe a lot of the religious icons and things that have happened. I believe Stephen was talking about Ezekiel and his wheel. A lot of that had to do with UFOs and aliens, and a lot of them connecting with Zechariah Sitchin of the Anunnaki, the ancient aliens and stuff like that. So that's why I'm in.
Okay, I am Philip Cox. I have been an engineer in the aerospace industry for the last 4 years. I began at the age of 19 when I got a Q clearance that allows me to have nuclear weapons design data. And I have maintained a clearance for the last 40 years. I've done an awful lot of work in locations in southern Nevada. I still have, I work for one of the major aerospace corporations that I can't tell you who I work for. I still have a clearance. I have to have that clearance in order to eat and pay tuition. So I am not going to crap where I eat. However, I look at myself as reason of being on this to lend maybe a little bit of well, not exactly the opposite, but the more skeptical person, perhaps. I don't know your guys' take on everything, so let's start there. We're going to open it up for discussion, or what do you guys would like to do? Would you like just go ahead?
Well, I want to make a few things clear.
Sure.
When we talk about things, start with definition. UFO means unidentified flying object. That means there's something in the sky. We have no idea what it is. Doesn't mean it's aliens. There's been other explanations, secret government, blah, 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 whatever. But it does not mean exactly aliens. It could be. I'm not saying it is, but just to make that point clear on the definition.
Okay.
What was the question?
Was there a question?
Skeptical? I don't know. I'm part of the Expeditions Unknown team. We study paranormal research, obviously. It'll be about usually ghosts. It would be cryptids, you know, your Bigfoot, your Tipton County wild man. I guess that somewhere in cryptids, aliens would fit, because they're not normal earthly things that we know of, right? Anyway, so the aspect of it, I guess, that I would come in at it is the idea of the shadow people, because, you know, they talk about there being a rip there, I guess, where they're coming through as these shadow people that we would see. You know, have you heard about this kind of thing, I guess?
Like a rip in space-time.
Basically, yeah. And, you know, my whole interest in the whole thing is waking up as a youth, and there are 4 or 5 or 6 of these shadow things around, and I was awake a while. Not a while, that sounds like a long time, but I was awake long enough to realize that I'm in my room, these things are here, the door's open, the light's coming in, they're blocking the light that's behind them on the wall. I saw it, I know it's there. And of course you start yelling, these things go through the wall, and the grandmother comes in and tells you, oh, it's just a bad dream. No, I was awake. No, it's a dream. I was awake. How can I dream if I'm awake? No. That whole thing. Everything has to be a dream sometimes, I guess. But anyways, so that's where my interest kind of got into the paranormal to start with. But then as years go on and I study it, it gets into the whole aspect of aliens. Which, there again, there's 3 things I'm scared of. Aliens, yeah. Snakes and ticks.
You got a good reason for the other 2.
Yeah.
You might have a good reason for the aliens as well.
I mean, I don't remember anything. There could have been a probe. I have no clue. I wasn't awake for that far.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing and a common thing I'm hearing right here. at least two of us, and three actually, since I'm saying it now, we've had these experiences in our past, and it's those kind of things that motivate us to look into it. And so that sort of draws so many people into this kind of investigation, is the fact that something strange that you can't explain from your own experience.
And who are you going to call?
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, really.
Not the government.
Now you have move on the call, but even then, if your experience doesn't involve a sighting, but it just involves these strange things like beings that come into your room, sometimes even MUFON will not be as interested in that as they would be an actual physical sighting of something in the sky, you know. But because that's really more of their purview.
Have we introduced them to what MUFON is? Do y'all know
I bet
MUFON?
most people here know.
I do.
I do.
Yeah. How many don't?
Don't you know? Oh, okay.
Okay, why don't you tell us?
Mutual UFO is it network? I'm not a member.
Mutual
Yeah, I've
UFO
heard that.
network.
Okay, mutual UFO.
I know Eddie Middleton, who's kind of over there somewhere, but
Right.
he's a good guy.
He's the local leader, I guess, of the local group here.
Yeah, he's the state director for Tennessee.
And yeah, it's a nationwide thing. You know, MUFON's all over the country.
Right.
So yeah, and it's gotten quite large in terms of they've really got a lot of case histories now. And that's another thing that to me is, you know, I hear a lot of skeptical people approach the subject as, you know, as is to suggest that there isn't evidence, or there's evidence that they apparently just either discount or don't know about. But the point is that when you really look into it, really look into the data itself, you start finding more and more and more. And sure, there's a mystery involved. It may or may not involve extraterrestrials. It may involve people here on Earth that are doing all this. There's one among the ufologists that we know of, Richard Dolan. He talks about the idea of the breakaway culture, a culture that is much, that's here on Earth of humans, that is much more advanced than the rest of us, and who basically keep their existence a secret from the rest of us. And it may be that this breakaway culture is responsible for a lot of the sightings that people have.
Mm-hmm. I've also heard that the time traveling theory that, humans from the past coming back to correct their own mistakes, or something like that. What intrigues me more, a lot of people talk about in the 20th century, all the sightings or whatever, but I mean, if you go back, Alexander the Great, seeing shields, flying shields in the sky and things of that nature. Whoever drove the Madonna picture, and they put the UFO this up there, and they actually saw a UFO in the sky while they were painting and said, that must be a sign from God. So I'm going to put this up here, and this is God's way of telling me I should paint this picture or whatever. Mm-hmm. So, we can go back further than Betty and Barney.
The India epics
Yes,
about the flying cities and whatnot that they have, the Manas.
Right. And there's some prudence to, even like I said, I studied a lot of religious claims, and even Krishna and the island in which he destroyed with lightning. I mean, they found that now, and it was definitely destroyed by some type of, not some volcanic eruption, but something that you really can't explain. So, I mean, it's something to all of it. You just can't discount any of it. Say it's just hocus mythology.
Well, you can discount it. People do.
You can discount it, but you can't prove it either.
No.
Right.
That's all I was going to say about it.
And that's what's part of the difficulty of not being able to prove it. At least it seems that we're not being told everything. Mm-hmm. Our own government seems to be keeping secrets from us. Now, whether they are or not, that's another question. But it certainly does appear that way. When they give lame explanations like weather balloons.
Unfortunately, the people who can explain things like that are not the ones who do explain things like that for the government. Mm-hmm. The people who explain things like that are typically colonels or other incompetent managers attached to the military-industrial complex. I will say that. People who actually know anything, and in some cases are responsible for some of the phenomena you're talking about, are not allowed to say a thing. Okay?
Well, let me ask you a question. Do you think, my own opinion, it is strictly opinion, is that quite frequently presidents are not told?
That's not true.
Okay, you think they are told, and then when they find out, they just say they don't know? Your opinion.
What, but I guarantee you
Some do, some don't,
the
or?
upper level of, the highest level of the United States government knows about all the black programs.
Okay. Well, I was thinking
At least
of
the
Bill
overview.
Clinton saying that he was trying to find out information about the UFOs, but he
There-
kept getting stalled.
There are multiple levels of classification. Used to be confidential, secret, top secret. But there are several compartmentalizations beyond that and aside from that. For instance, I mentioned earlier that I had a Q clearance. I don't have a Q clearance anymore. Q clearance is only for nuclear weapons data. It does not permit you, for instance, access to what's called black programs, deniable programs.
But you think the president, whoever the president is always informed of this stuff? I sort of wonder if some of the bureaucratic parts of
He doesn't know the
government.
details. He knows the top level, he has a top level understanding of the intent and the progress
Okay.
and the cost of such programs.
You don't think
Programs
that they're running some of their own?
cameras are going to, right?
Right.
No, actually, those are open, most of those go to Boeing and Lockheed.
No.
I don't work for either one of those.
Well, I was just wondering about entrenched bureaucracy, because that certainly exists. And I was just wondering if you thought they might be keeping any secrets of their own from.
They try.
Oh, okay.
But if they're an incompetent bureaucracy, they're also usually pretty incompetent about their trail.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
As far as the programs and getting clearance for programs, as far as taking these further up, would that be the same thing through a process like the FISA court and the FISA courts?
Oh dear. The FISA courts,
Since that is intelligence.
yeah, well, it's, in many ways, intelligence is an oxymoron when applied in the industry. Yeah, there are provisions to get around any court system there is. The United States actually have clauses that says, for the good of the company, for the good of the government,
I think your first was more likely.
and that was not a Freudian slip. However, one of the problems I have is I've been embedded in the industrial complex for 40 years now, and I'm so glad to be getting close to retirement. I can't stand it. Because of, well, that kind of thing. It's at the upper echelons of industrial corporations, and the Pentagon is like that. They scrub each other's back, believe me. Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to finish your sentence, but I guess the question I would ask, and you can answer it any way you want to. They say that there's correct me if I'm wrong, it's rumored that there's like a Majestic Six, and they're like the 6 people who make the decisions for the.
I always heard it called Majestic 12.
It is. Majestic 12.
Majestic something.
Truman was supposed to have
The other
started
6 are
it.
going to be pissed.
You just have
Maybe that's the ones that are still alive.
That was supposed to have been started by President Truman.
Yes.
Nobody knows, but
Well,
Is that true?
I don't know.
Supposedly.
I don't know that. Honestly, I don't know. There was a review board with Vannevar Bush and a bunch of other guys. Bush is the only ones, but they were reviewing technology. As far as I know, there was no alien technology. As far as I know, I have never seen or heard of alien technology being either captured or scavenged by the United States military. As what's the, not Kevlar, but the I'm trying to
Nylon?
Huh?
Nylon?
Velcro.
Velcro is what I hear is popularly came from aliens. It didn't, it came from Minnesota.
Yeah. say same thing about microchips and everything.
Yes, and I've also heard about pieces of metal that you could grab and bend and it would magically go back into shape. We've had that since the 1800s. Yeah, it's called shape memory alloy. Nitinol, it's a mixture of nickel and titanium. Okay, so in fact, if anybody here has a heart stent, they're actually made now out of shape memory alloy, because you can freeze it and it makes a nice little compact blob. They stick it in your artery into the blockage and then just turn it, leave it. And as it warms up, it goes back to its original shape, which is a nice meshy cylinder which opens your arteries. But we've been using it in the aerospace for years. It also has a property called super elasticity. It's the only metal that you can really stretch and bend out of its way, and it's not really as elastic as like real elastic. It's stiff like metal. It retains because it is a metal. But most of those technologies, I'm not going to say that that's all, are well known and have been well known.
What about the technologies that they say they took from Germany during World War II?
Oh, there's plenty of those. I work in Huntsville. In fact, I used to work for one of those Germans, Dr. Stuhlinger. Yeah, Erd Stuhlinger.
So it is true that they're saucer shaped and reverse engineered?
The Germans did try some, at the close of World War II, some things with saucer-shaped aircraft, but so did the Americans. In fact, we had aircraft that were flying at the end of World War II that were saucer-shaped. There's one that you can find on the internet called Flying Flapjack. And look it up sometime and imagine that with, there he's doing it.
Technology to work on.
Oh, look, and it's powered by maple syrup.
Well, it was Chance Vault was the manufacturer, the same people that made the Corsair, the bent-wing fighter. And it was a propeller-driven aircraft that was capable of almost 600 miles per hour. And another 70 or 80 miles an hour and you're at Mach 1. And after World War II, for all intents and purposes, that program just went and died. But that's all for all intents and purposes. Okay, and you can take that to mean whatever you want it to mean. But if you can pull up a picture of it, you'll see, it will amaze you. But some of you have phones you look forward to called Flying Flapjack. There, yep.
That's a little dude here.
There you go. Vertical takeoff and landing.
Yeah. Gosh, I wish you guys could see this.
Now, imagine that vehicle without the propellers.
Yeah.
Without the propellers, they're doing it
Without the
So that'd be
propellers.
a jet form of it.
They destroyed all the prototypes too, didn't they?
Yes.
And they destroyed all the prototypes too, didn't they?
They supposedly destroyed all the prototypes and tooling. What's really more important about that is tooling. You can always reconstitute a design, but if you didn't get rid of the tooling, it's not nearly as expensive the second time as it was the first time. But I don't want to dominate what's going on.
No, go ahead, because I have nothing.
Well,
I'm enjoying hearing about
if you
flying
apply
flapjacks.
a different propulsion technology to that, what does it look like?
It looks very similar.
I didn't study
Well-
for this test. So. Asking me hard questions.
No. I mean, if it has like internal jet engines rather than
No,
external
I mean, that would be,
sponsons, and it's a disc.
it is.
Right.
And
If I saw that in the air, I would
and
run.
it takes to do modifications like that. It takes a couple of years to take a fuselage like that and put new engines and things and start testing it. And if you say that they killed that program at the end of 1945, and say a couple of years later One crash, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
in the desert.
Somebody had to come up with some kind of
Would they have lived?
Well, probably not, considering it was, might have been strewn into several thousand pieces.
Yeah.
Remember, the propeller version flew nearly 600 miles per hour. And with the jet engines, even the jet engines at that time were more powerful than.
So talking about the speed and the power and everything, and thinking back on the, wasn't there a video released from NASA where they had something?
Go back up.
Yeah.
I've seen that too, but I have no idea what that was.
Somebody tried to say condensation. Is there condensation in space? Like water floating around? Like,
Well, yeah, there is a possibility, but there's not anything like that. The density would be so small, so low that you would not get a cloud formation that high.
yeah.
Now, what I heard, it was some type of space debris, and then they shot the boosters or some kind of propulsion, and it shot up, and it
That's,
looked like.
that is, it could have been on a ballistic trajectory, like a piece of space debris or a missile booster, and then if something, some sort of propulsion, a thruster or something fired, it could look like it moved 90 degrees locally.
Now, nobody up there would have thrown like a cigarette out the window.
If it was a cigarette, the cigarette would have been traveling at the same velocity or the same trajectory, just slightly divergent, right? But it couldn't go all of a sudden unless it had a thruster on it, or you get a cigarette load or something like that, or you get some really good stuff.
But anyway, so see, stuff like that is always interesting to me, and talking about the trajectories and the
Well,
propulsion.
there's one of those orbital videos where it apparently shows somebody shooting at it.
Mm-hmm.
One of them.
Oh, this was over in
And
Arkansas.
again, that one changes course. So that you see the thing moving along, and it appears like something shot at, like you say, and it changes course. So, just the debris does not change course.
At the
unless it's some other
time,
force, like
at the
this.
time that was made, we didn't have anything to shoot at it with that I knew of. Okay, I won't say that now.
I want to bring up something the young lady and me were talking about. We were talking about USOs earlier, and then you can ask them the more follow-up questions. But I know that from the videos I've seen or whatever, that a lot of USOs, I guess the eyewitness accounts is that when USOs come up, they don't drip water or anything. They just come out the water.
That's entirely possible.
Now, how would that work if other than alien technology?
We
how would that work?
we have the technology to make bullets and other large objects fly underwater without touching the water.
How does that work?
That you create a gaseous boundary layer around the object. The Russians actually, our dear buddies, for the last 30 years have had a torpedo that is rocket powered, that actually diverts part of the rocket exhaust into the skin of the vehicle, and the skin of the vehicle is perforated like an air hockey table and squirts air so that the actual hull or skin of the torpedo makes no contact with water. It's an air interface. The air is taking the drag.
That is both brilliant and frightening.
It is. It is. And the U.S. Navy has been working for years, actually has a cannon that does this. So an airborne cannon.
Wow.
That can conceivably, if they could locate a submarine, actually shoot it with a cannon without any problem with the water interference.
We have a question from a college student over here.
Oh, yes.
No. I was just going to ask if the U.S. had anything similar to
Well,
Russian.
that's just one of the things.
Okay.
But the Navy is also about to actually field a ship with a railgun on it. That will be in the next 5 years. They've been working, the Navy's been working for 20 years at least on how to actually make a repeatable railgun. We've known how to do it for decades, except that it destroyed itself every time it fired, so that's kind of a slight drawback.
What is a railgun?
A railgun is an electromagnetic cannon that can fire a slug anywhere between 20 and 40 kilometers per second. Velocities.
When I've seen them in the garden, they look really slow.
Yeah, that's true. But those are not the, I know, the slugs, yeah. But they won't do it through salt water.
That's true.
Hence,
You can be as funny as you want to try to be, but you can never outdo an engineer because they know everything.
and we're very glad to tell you that. I should explain something else. In my current job, I build the electronic systems for UAVs, drones, the next embodiment of evil.
Well, I appreciate that. To get your Amazon Prime to you quicker, right? Of course, my problem is I live in Memphis. So
I just saw somewhere on the internet just last week where somebody's finally putting a taser on a little quadrotor drone. Can you imagine the number of injuries they're going to get from beer bottles thrown at this thing? Imagine, we're in Tennessee, Bonnaroo is in Tennessee, in Manchester actually, where we used to live. We were there when the first Bonnaroo came to town. Can you imagine having something like that over the crowd, for crowd control? With a bunch of drunken idiots.
Yeah, but the other guy, people get hit by it won't feel it till the next day.
Until the next day, yeah.
By a bottle.
What are you doing? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Have you noticed one of the things though that's really creepy about that kind of a thing is the fact that everything from science fiction way back when is coming true now?
Yeah.
And it's like science is actually saying, hey, that was a good movie and I like that, let's do that.
We've had drones since about 1918. It's just that we couldn't control them worth crap until the digital revolution and the last 20 years that we were actually able to control them, where they just wouldn't go every time. Oh yeah, it's flying, it's flying. It's like sheep falling out of a tree.
Well, let me ask about, you talked about the Navy and stuff that they've got, and we've talked about a little bit about submersibles. And I'm just wondering, are we doing anything about being able to explore the bottom of the ocean? Because, as my understanding, we know less about that than practically anything. The abysmal plain, and I'm not talking just about the Marianas Trench, which is so deep. I'm talking about, I've heard said it's like we know about, we've explored about 5% of it.
Yeah, or maybe even less than that.
Yeah.
I know that the Navy knows more about it than anybody else. And in fact, I think they, 10 years ago, released all the maps that they had of the bottom, the ones that you see on Google Earth now.
Yeah.
Are actual naval data. But we are simultaneously with the UAVs and being able to control those, we're also being able to control submersibles as well. And we're going through a revolution in deep submersible technology.
Well, what I want to know is there's no light down there unless we bring it. So are they, at least that's my understanding. Of course, our main is visual.
That's true.
Are we using anything, any kind of wavelengths or anything that we can transform into a visual analog system for ourselves to be able to see?
The only thing we use underwater other than visible light is
sonar?
Acoustics.
Okay.
It's acoustics, sound.
I was just wondering, because we do so many things with the,
But low frequencies, you don't have much resolution. You can't, it just looks like a blob. No matter what you do, you can't get over that limitation.
So we still have that limitation.
Yes, we do.
I was just thinking of all the different radiation spectrum that we use for the stars and galaxies and all.
The U.S.
They don't seem to work underwater though
The
very well.
U.S. Navy has microphones over the entire world under the oceans. And they can detect just about any moving object in the water or on top of the water. However, the problem that they run into is they can't, because they can't process the data. There's just so much data. It's like the NSA. You know.
Yeah.
They don't have the computing power. They don't have the manpower.
So we can't really get resolution on anything that we,
No.
to get to our main
Radio and
sense, which is
radar
visual.
has a travel length of about that far underwater. You can use blue-green lasers but they have to be tuned to the local conditions, to the exact color of the ocean in the locality that you're at, to have any penetration whatsoever.
So that's still a mystery round then.
Yes, it is, very much.
Now, another thing about the UFO, I guess people who see UFOs or whatever, they usually say, number one, they come with a bunch of lights. And the question that most people ask, if it's experimental government things, well, why would the government, if it's trying to keep it a secret, have all these flashing in the club lights? And, you know,
Fair question.
rave or whatever. And, you know, usually they're very large as well. I call them the floating Star Destroyers, being a Star Wars fan. And they like triangular shaped, and they have lights on each point. And they like hover there and make sure everybody goes in the house, gets their camera.
That's one of the things I know nothing about, the big triangular ones. I can tell you that if you're testing something, a new aircraft, you do want to make it visible to the people who are watching it. Because not only are there civilians in the area, there are a lot of people whose job is to watch that thing fly.
Oh, really?
Regardless of whether there's a person on board it or not. The largest aircraft wingspan I personally have ever seen is about 100 meters.
100 meters.
Compare that to something, please. I can't visualize
300
meters.
feet, a football field.
Okay, that I can visualize.
Okay?
Well, these people who are watching it, they're working for the government as well, right?
Yes, or a manufacturer.
Well, I would say if they're trying to watch them and trying to see, wouldn't they have some type of infrared or something
Yes.
that the regular people wouldn't have to see?
Yes,
Like,
they would.
see,
They
you know?
would, but the vast majority would have eyeballs. Usually also the beacon lights also work in the near infrared, which night vision goggles can pick up quite well. I spent a lot of my career working on thermals, actually, myself, but the thermals are a mixed blessing with something like that. And you can see it, it's really easy, in fact, to see something against the night sky in thermal, because if it's a room temperature object, the skies, you're looking at space, which is terribly cold.
Okay.
So you get a nice bright signature of even a bird or the most mundane thing up there. Looks very, very bright.
I guess my next question would be, for a lot of people who said that UFOs were in this area and they go over there, a lot of times it's probably a comment or something like I forgot the one that they say it was a UFO and it crashed and made the trees bend over or something. They found out
Tunguska?
Yeah, Tunguska. And Carl Sagan explained wonderfully how, the comets will melt,
Yeah,
Yeah, Tunguska was a bolide that
Yeah.
blew up high in the atmosphere and essentially was, I can't remember how many nuclear weapons it had the equivalent of. But the thing about a nuclear weapon is if it doesn't, there's no radiation to speak of unless it hits something, the fireball hits something. And so if it's high enough in the atmosphere, we proved that with our own nuclear weapons. There's no radiation. There may be blast effects and light effects. But I'm pretty sure, and eventually they found, I'm pretty sure, some chunks of that in a lake near the Tunguska event.
I don't think so. I do know that
They might not
the
have,
most recent event that happened a couple years ago in Russia, they found the remains in a lake, but that might be why I'm not sure.
One of the things about Tunguska that they found, of course, was over ground zero, trees were still standing straight up, but all the way around they were all splayed out, going away from that,
Yeah.
which is
Cool.
Well, it is cool, but it is also a characteristic of a large airburst. And seeing data on large airburst effects, and that's exactly the kind of effect. And so it wasn't a nuclear, it was just a thermal blast. And that this thing is hurtling in at 40,000 miles per hour and heating its outer layers up. Yes, and it just can't expand fast enough.
Would that sort of phenomenon leave the area with like a magnetic anomaly aspect? Because that's one of the things I've heard about that site is that there's
Well, the magnetic anomaly itself might be coming from bits and pieces of the meteorite itself, because many of them are nickel iron chondrites, which they're 90% nickel and iron, and some of them are highly magnetized. And all the turmoil they go through are they're stuck out in the solar wind for billions of years, so they acquire a charge, and they probably don't know this for sure, create their own magnetic field. They're not a dynamo, but they acquire it because they're constantly being hit by protons, which are the solar wind, which are plausibly charged. So, yes, I can't answer your question, exactly for sure, but I can see instances. I can come up with things in my head that would explain magnetic anomalies in the area and density problems, density changes in the ground.
So what about the bodies though? When they say that they go to UFO crash and they find these small bodies of look like small children, of course the graves and the other thing.
They were hobbits.
Explains not just the big head, but the big feet.
The hair got singed off the feet.
Can I ask, we're talking about the United States doing all this with the secret programs and all, and I'm assuming that the USSR did for a while. Right now, though, do you have any speculation about which countries may be doing this sort of stuff? I'm not talking about being necessarily aggressors or anything like that, but are there any other countries that are putting quite a bit of their intelligence and their money into super secret projects like this? Which ones would you say are doing it? I mean, I've heard of India maybe.
India is, Iran is, but Pakistan has tried. The USSR stopped in the 90s. The money stopped flowing for everything. They were doing some interesting things, the Russians were. They had an actual electromagnetic generator that caused an earthquake in Kazakhstan, as far as we know. That's the rumor, I should say.
Well, are there colleges that are are universities? I mean, you hear about them coming over here to ours, even though our education system is supposedly crap, but you still hear about them sending people over here to learn. And do they have that kind of...
We're rapidly losing that edge.
That's why I was wondering, is it going, where's it going? I mean, where are the scientists...
They're taking it home with them.
And establishing it there?
China is one of the world's most progressive educational nations now.
They're putting their money into the education and all?
That's why India, you've seen how the standard of living and the industrialization of several countries in the last 20 years that you didn't expect, like India, for instance, and China, and that's a direct result of their decades of sending graduate students and to our universities and learning what the Americans
Those would be two of the main countries that are headed this way? I mean, that are heavily into this
they're going back
investigation?
and changing their own educational systems and making them like the American standard used to be. And it used to be that universities in many other countries, especially third world countries, you weren't taught how to think. You were taught facts. It was like studying the Quran.
Rote learning.
If you were an engineering student, you were taught the Newton's laws and made to recite them. Didn't matter if that you could understand what it meant.
Or apply.
But that's what an education was. But the American standard, and generally the Western standard, was a lot different. You were taught how to understand what it means and how to apply it. But that's changed over the last generation.
I'm a teacher, I've seen it change.
Oh, yeah.
We had a question here for the past 20 minutes.
I'm sorry.
That's good.
Oh, I am sorry too, I did that.
Oh, that's fine.
No, it's all right.
Actually, I'm glad we related because he actually brought up something interesting about the lights. I actually now have two questions. The first is, so I do a lot with aerospace education, and one of the main things that's principle behind aircraft at all to keep it flying is downdraft over the wing of, or
Pressure differential over the
pretty
wings.
much, yes. Dealing with a lot of stuff that many physicists have done, etc. But how would you be able to explain an object such as some of these UFOs that are really just suspended objects that aren't moving at all? It's like they have an airspeed velocity of 0.
We don't know that.
Because it's
That
like...
they apparently have, I'll caveat it by saying that, they apparently have an airspeed of 0. We have aircraft that regularly apparently have airspeeds of 0.
Any that we're seeing, I mean, that we know of? Because agreeing with her,
One of them's called a helicopter.
well, yes, but we're talking about
And there are
something.
many
Can you
versions.
hide the blades in that case? I'm serious, I'm not
Yes.
trying to be.
Yes. And there are helicopters that make little or no sound. That's where people
But
get hung up on
simply
those.
not being out there in the public, they aren't.
And how would you be able to explain something that's much larger than an average helicopter? Some of these things that have been seen that are suspended are miles long.
I have problems with those descriptions also. People up say, well, it was this big, it was that big. If it's in the sky and you're further than 100 yards away from it, you really don't know how big it is.
What about the stuff that's been coming from pilots that have seen it up close?
Pilots have seen UFOs for ever since there's been aircraft. Again, there's no evidence of any of it. And there's only eyewitness testimony to that, and people sometimes are really bad witnesses.
Yeah.
They don't have, I don't want to say they don't have training and things like this, but a pilot obviously does. But a pilot has a lot on his mind when he's doing stuff, when he's flying.
What about the pilots that, while they're flying and the UFO comes around them, they say to turn off their instruments, and as soon as it leaves, the instruments come back on?
I have no explanation for that. That can be done in engineers can do that. We can do that now. And we're supposedly, you can't turn your cell phone on an airliner. They're afraid something like that's going to happen, even though the probability is way down in the zeros. But you can, it's not exactly suppressing an electromagnetic signal, but electromagnetic fields can scramble things like that. It could set off. Aircraft have a lot of electronics in them, a lot of electrical systems, and they're all protected by circuit breakers.
Okay.
Every last one. And it also happens in your car as well.
Okay.
In that we can trip circuit breakers remotely without increasing the current in your electrical system. Of course, the problem with that is that most circuit breakers are not automatic reset. You have to physically go over and go click and bring it back. But I'm not trying to explain this away or anything, but I'm saying that there are problems with aircraft electronic systems that can be induced. Okay? Now, I know of no program or aircraft that can do that to another aircraft. So that is an object for speculation. I'm not going to deny or confirm that.
Right. It's just good to hear alternate explanations.
Yes.
So we can come to a conclusion.
Yes.
She had another question.
And we got 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
My second question, so I asked one that's more like why it now explained to me this. Now, this is one more on the skeptic side. I know whenever we do search and rescues or whenever we're doing any sort of tests, a lot of times it's very useful to be able to use markers to zero in on an object or to be able to mark off a certain area.
Yeah.
As far as things like what happened in Phoenix with the flyovers, would it be possible at all that the lights and things that people are seeing, in the event that it is some sort of a government test, is something more or less like an airspace marker? And that's the reason why it's such a large space, is because it's something more along the lines of, if we're looking to see if somebody would be able to see this from the ground, or if we were to be able to see if someone could see this during the night, we need to look somewhere within this space, tell the pilot to stay between these coordinates, and then those outsides are actually a marker system?
Yes, what you're actually describing was used by the Japanese in World War II for night attacks. They would use some of their own aircraft to drop things like parachute flares to mark a lane for their own aircraft to where the American carriers were, for instance. So that kind of technique has been used, and for all I know, still is used.
So do you think that that would possibly be an
It's possible,
explanation for
yes.
something that
In many
happened?
cases, I think that a light, a triangular system of lights is not necessarily filled in unless you can see stars through it. I mean, it's obviously transparent if you see stars through it, but not being able to see through it does not necessarily mean it's all solid.
Yeah.
And also for the last many years, at least a couple of decades, there have been UAVs around that can mark areas and be used for illumination. But that in and of itself, I'm not going to tell you anything more. Okay. But like I said, UAVs have been around for decades.
Is there anything that you've heard of, or stories or things, which you have to say, I don't know the answer to that? I mean, in your engineering, looking at it as an engineer and whatnot, with the things that you do know, have there been incidents where you have to say, I don't know how the heck they did that? Or can you come up with explanations? Huh?
You mean for real?
Yeah, I mean for real.
I mean,
Can you always rationalize it? I'm not being sarcastic or anything.
Actually, no. I have never ever worked on a program or seen anything in my career that didn't have an explanation or didn't have a physical.
And you've never heard of any, like I said, I'm not trying to be sarcastic about it, I'm simply asking, in the stories that are out there and stuff, and I mean, sometimes it's just that I know stories.
I know.
But have you ever scratched your head and said,
How did that happen?
yeah,
No, I haven't.
haven't ever encountered anything?
No, never, ever. And also, I want to go on record saying there's no such thing as S4.
As what?
S4.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
So it's like G14 classified.
S4 was the site of our fourth nuclear test. Well, it was not a facility in Papoose Lake. Okay.
Well, before we leave, are they there? Are they in space? Are they there? What do you think?
I think there's a very, very, very high probability they are in space. I have seen no evidence to convince me that they are on Earth. And that includes a lot of stuff.
I'll say one thing that the followers of Zechariah Sitchin are saying that the ancient Sumerians knew about all the 9 planets that we know about today, and we only knew about the planet Pluto till 1930 or whatever, and they knew about the shape and the
Pluto's
position.
not a planet?
Well, I'm not you have to give a Neil deGrasse Tyson about that.
Poor guy.
they say that, you know, it explains, you know, why the ancients knew about that, and they say with evolution, there's a break in our, you know, evolutionary process, and they say that's the part where they.
I don't discount, one of my things that I like to do is look up old lost technologies and things and try to track down some of those. And we know that there's lots of things the ancients knew how to do that have been lost to antiquity, like batteries, electroplating, cement.
And how they painted the stuff in the tombs, because the bouncing mirrors of sunlight into the tombs didn't seem to work. They had all these paintings in there. How the heck did they paint them in the dark?
Yeah, they didn't have, the torches couldn't work because the oxygen would
They
have.
use night vision goggles.
And who is to say that the Egyptians didn't have night vision goggles? That's a big leap, but
Yeah.
Maybe they got fireflies.
I'm just saying, you know, that what they started with saying, oh, they painted it by bouncing mirror light, or they painted by torch, you know, that just don't work.
People shouldn't really believe their own brains sometimes when they say, well, you know, the only way to do that is to build a big ramp and drag the blocks up there. And I said, maybe, maybe not. We usually find out that the explanation is much simpler, very simple, because we're not any more intelligent than the ancient Egyptians were.
Well, I even read a thing that says we're not quite as intelligent, that we've actually dumbed ourselves down to breed.
Well, I believe that. If you watch the Kardashians, you.
Yes.
Good example. Our time is. Oh, go ahead.
One last point I'd like to make is that one of the things to consider, you know, it is good to have a healthy skepticism. I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
You know, I have an open mind, but not so open that my brain pours out of my ear. You have to have that skepticism. But at the same time, bear this in mind. J. Allen Hynek, who the government hired to look into this back in the 60s and 70s, or actually 60s. He started off as a skeptic, but at the end, he believed that there was something genuinely unexplainable that seemed to be beyond Earth. So, bearing that in mind, you know, when the skeptic really looks into it, really looks deep into it.
And I agree that
they can find
there are
things.
things on Earth that we have not dreamt of, Horatio.
All right.
And my belief of it is aliens exist because I've been to enough conventions. They're there. Thank you, everybody.